So, Linda, tell me about the first time you heard the words hypertrophic cardiomyopathy.
I actually heard the words the first time twice. So the first time I heard the word was about 10 years before I was actually diagnosed, and my brother was diagnosed.
Mm.
And so this was back in probably around 2000, 2001. He had been diagnosed as a secondary to AFib and some other issues that he was dealing with. So he had talked to my mother and he had said, he had written down on a piece, and I always remember this, he had it written down on this yellow piece of paper from the doctor's office, and it said hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And he told my mom that the doctor said that the family member should be checked for this, that this is a genetic disease. I was young at the time, and my mom showed it to me, and I just remember she put it away in this file cabinet in a room, and we all forgot the word. I mean, literally forgot the word. And about 5 years later, I had my first major heart situation where I thought that I was having a heart attack. I had chest pain and shortness of breath, and I was feeling like, that I couldn't breathe. And so I gone to the doctor. They set up a EKG, found it to be abnormal. They set up an echo, found it to be abnormal, sent me for a cath, found it to be normal, and said, no, there's no problem with your heart. So you're fine. You're fine. And this was around 2005 or 2006. So for the next couple of years, I continued to have more episodes. I continued to feel worse. Fatigue worsened, intolerance to exercise, my ability at that time, 3 young children, as a parent, work full time was just overwhelming. And I just became more and more ill, spending more and more time in bed. Went to different doctors, went back and forth to ERs. I was sent to a EP. They did an EP study, said, no, your heart's normal. So everybody in my world of care was telling me that there was actually nothing wrong with my heart. Then one day I had a conversation with my mom, and we remembered that piece of paper that was folded up in her file cabinet. And we took out that piece of paper, and I took it to the cardiologist the next appointment, and I handed it to him, and I said, could this be what's wrong with me? And he looked at it and he said, no, you would have different, and your echo would have been, would have showed thickness. And he didn't go back and look at the echo that they had done a year before, but he just said from his memory that, no, your echo was fine. I went on for another couple of years, taking medications that were actually hurting me and not helping me. I was taking, instead of the beta blocker, I was taking the medication that was actually opening up my...
You're taking lisinopril, probably.
Right. And so it was actually making my situation worse because now my heart had more blood flow to deal with. So that was making me sicker and sicker and less able to tolerate any kind of activity whatsoever. Ended up finally after six years, I got diagnosed at Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville. And then, so that was kind of like the second time that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy really had an impact on me, because at that moment I had to understand what it really meant, because now that was my diagnosis. And I was very sick at that time.
That you were. So welcome to Tales from the Heart, a podcast from the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association. And this is a special edition of Share Your Story, Patient Edition. And we are with Lynda, who is also one of our discussion group leaders, not only a patient, and we'll hear about the rest of her story in a few minutes because it takes a couple of turns, and we'll show you where it lands in a few minutes. So Lynda, welcome, and thank you for coming online and joining us and sharing your story.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Well, we're just thrilled to have you here. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the discussion group that you've been running since the onset of COVID and through a couple of hills and valleys, which we'll go into in a few minutes in your personal journey. So tell us about your group.
So I do an emotional support group. We have a lot of different roads that we go on in my panel. If I have a larger group, we will do something a little bit more formal where we might go over. My favorite thing is to talk about different types of strategies to deal with stress and frustration and depression and those kinds of. So we talk about all kinds of strategies out there, meditation, walking, and, in some cases therapy is helpful, music, there's a lot of different, and we get a lot of input from our participants about different strategies that they use, and we share them and talk about the advantages and disadvantages. Other times I'll have a meeting where I only have one or two participants, and a lot of times they're newly diagnosed, and we can just sit and have a really nice conversation about what it's like to live with HCM, early on when we might have less complications, and later on when the complications become a little bit more difficult to deal with, and decisions have to be made about different routes of treatment. And I've pretty much experienced every possible routes of treatment that there is in HCM. So, I can empathize, understand, and really relate to everybody's journeys, because I've probably been on that part of the journey at some point or another in mine.
Yes, that is true. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned your brother earlier. I always get goosebumps when I talk about the siblings and their stories and how they interact with ours. So your brother was diagnosed way before you. We came to know each other, and you started getting involved with education and awareness through HCMA. And we talked about your brother a bit, and we worked to get him to some care, which met with some complications. So you want to talk a little bit about your brother's journey?
He had a more electrical side of HCM. So he did have thickness that wasn't properly recognized by his doctors, but he was more concerned with the inconveniences of AFib and different types of rhythms that were affecting his leading to his heart failure. So he went the route of cardioversions. He eventually had an electrical ablation, and then ultimately a maze surgery. So at the time of the maze surgery, I think is when Lisa and I first started talking about what we could do to help him, because the surgeon that was getting ready to do that surgery, they weren't paying any attention to the fact that he had HCM. They were looking at it totally from his electrical problem point of view. And I really did my best to advocate for him, because I was his surrogate, his healthcare surrogate. And I really pushed for, at that time, I was even willing to travel with him to another state to be able to get him a better evaluation. But he did go forward with the surgery. I talked to the surgeon after, and the surgeon actually admitted that there was more in there than they were able to deal with, and that he did have a thickness that they couldn't deal with at the time that he was in the middle of an open heart surgery for the electrical part, the maze surgery that he was having done. So ultimately, he had a very slow recovery from that, and went into a much more serious case of
Advanced heart failure.
Advanced heart failure, right, where he was being treated with the heart failure medications because his ejection fraction was so low. And he lived like that for another 3 or 4 years. I continued to try. We ended up getting CEOs closer to home. He was living in Tampa. We got Orlando became available. And then eventually we had Fort Lauderdale as well. I went to both of those CEOs, and I had, doctors that were willing to see him. And he just was stubborn in his ways and didn't want to make the effort to. So eventually he was being treated for advanced end-stage heart failure. And he passed away in February of 2021.
I'm sorry. I really wish that we could have changed things earlier for him. And it's pretty horrible to lose a sibling to HCM. Any family member we lose is always tragic, but siblings, we kind of think they're gonna go the road with us. They're gonna be there the whole time, and when they part early, it leaves a pretty big space in our families and in our hearts.
Definitely, yes, yeah.
So he passed in 21, and you were going through some particular challenges as well during that time.
Correct.
So when did things take a pretty significant turn for you in your HCM journey?
So I had a myectomy and then another myectomy in 2012. So I had the first myectomy in June of 2012, and didn't have the results that I had hoped. I was still pretty significantly affected symptom-wise, and really much change in the ability to be able to function as far as still dealing with the fatigue and the chest pain and shortness of breath and all the other issues. So we did a lot of investigating back and forth to my provider, trying to look for other causes of the of obstruction. Ultimately, they felt that there might have been a problem with my mitral valve, and so we planned a second open heart to replace the mitral valve and possibly to remove more of the thickened tissue. But once they got in there, very rare situation and very uncommon, but there was some remodeling with my heart that had created more thickness. And so once they did more myectomy, my mitral valve was working properly. So they didn't have to replace my mitral valve, and I actually had a second myectomy. From that point on, I had some improvement in that I wasn't dealing with so much chest pain, but my exercise intolerance, my fatigue, my shortness of breath, none of that improved. So at that point, we were working with diastolic dysfunction, and we were just trying to maintain. We were trying to not let it get worse.
Let's unpack that a little bit for people who listen and they're like, wait, what's that word? I don't hear that one very often.
Okay, right.
So diastolic dysfunction is fancy words for your heart just can't relax. It just kind of stays
stiff. Right.
And it's not opening up, filled with blood for that next contraction. It's just kind of staying rigid.
So without the relaxation that the heart needs, I wasn't getting enough blood to pump out. So it's a form of heart failure, but it's the opposite of what the traditional heart failure is, where your heart's not pumping. My heart was pumping. It just wasn't pumping anything. It wasn't pumping enough blood. So I was still having the effects of heart failure. So early on, the doctor that I was seeing at the time, the HCM doctor, he said the best thing I could do for myself is keep moving, and whatever that looks like for me. Walking at the pace that I could live with and that I could function with, that's what I need to do. Movement, yoga, light weights, whatever it took. The more I moved, the more I could maintain the state that I was in at this time. So, we continued to manage the symptoms with the medications that we had available at the time. Mostly it was metoprolol, and which a beta blocker, which increased the tired feelings that we had and our energy levels. So it was the treatment was also contributing to the symptoms. So this went on, and I maintained this state for about 7 years. In 2019, I started to really see a change again in how my ability to function was started to get worse. It had never really improved to a point where I was able to get back to a full work schedule and raising 3 teenagers. I had become a single mom unexpectedly, and I had a lot going on, but I was managing it. But I got to the point where it just was becoming impossible. So 2019 was the first time that I was sent to a heart failure specialist. And that's the first time that they talked about that there might be a heart transplant in my future. And it was a lot to unpack, as you would say. And again, Lisa became a source of support for me at that point, because I shared something that she had, or I would be sharing something that she had already experienced. Yes.
So you were heading down the change of heart concept, and we were looking at options, but roads don't always get paved smoothly. Some of them have bumps and turns that we don't expect. So it took you a little bit longer on the list than we had originally thought it might. And how long did it take you to get listed after the T word came up? Another year or two?
It was actually a couple of years. Yeah. It was right after that. That was around November of 2019 when I first had that discussion with the heart transplant. And I was actually still traveling out of state for my care at that time, because that's where my care had been. And so 2020, I started to have some more severe issues. My symptoms were getting much worse.
Great year to have medical complications.
And I had nowhere to go. I had made an appointment at the Orlando COE, which was, a couple hours from my home, which would have been more manageable than flying to another state. And they canceled the appointment just a couple of weeks before I was supposed to have it, because it was...
It took a while to get to transplant, we know, because 2020 came around. It's a really bad time to need advanced care when the world is kind of falling apart. So there was a pause for you due to COVID. And then what happened?
So in the late 2020, I was able to get in to see the heart transplant team down at Cleveland Clinic in Fort Lauderdale. At that time, they confirmed that I was now at the stage where I would need to look at transplant. So the early part of 2021, I went through the process of being evaluated and going through the tests that were needed to determine whether I was a good candidate. And in February 9th, 2021, I was listed for transplant.
A couple of days after my transplant anniversary.
Yes.
But you got listed, but you were not your average transplant patient. You
Correct.
had some complications that made it a little bit more challenging. Can you explain that?
Yes. So one of the things that they look for, in addition to having a match with your blood type, is they look at antibodies, and different people have different levels of antibodies for different reasons. And there's several different things that increase your antibodies. And that would be, for women, it's pregnancy. For all people, it can be blood transfusions or prior organ transplants, those types of things. So in my case, it was my pregnancies. And over the years, I have 3 children, and I had one pregnancy that I had lost. So I had actually been pregnant 4 times. And that made me less likely to be matched to another candidate because of the high antibodies I had, which put me at about a 97% level, which meant that out of every 100 possible people that I could match with, I would only match with 3 of them. So they said it could be a couple of years before they could find a matching heart. But they had some options for me to try that might increase my ability to be able to find a heart sooner. So I went through some treatments where they basically cleaned my blood of the antibodies and then gave me a medication that was a type of like cancer, like a chemo type medicine that would hold them down for a bit from returning. And it would open up these windows. We had no idea how long these windows would be, but it would open up this window where I'd be less sensitized, right? The first time we did it, it desensitized me down to about 52%, which significantly increased my chance to find a heart. We found out the windows were only lasting for about 2 to 3 weeks. So I'd be back up to 97% again. So it became a game of reducing trying to find a heart in that short period. And so this went on. For the first time I had the treatment was in June. I would have to spend about 10 days in the hospital. And then about 2 or 3 weeks after that of follow-up medications. And we did it in June. We did it in September. And then I think shortly after the September window closed, they found a heart for me. And it was in October of 21. And it was a perfect match without the desensitization process. But it was a risky heart because it was a heart that was already, a person hadn't passed away yet. And so once they removed the life support equipment, if she didn't pass in a certain period of time, the heart would be compromised. And they wouldn't be able to use it.
Minute and talk about the ways people become organ donors. And for those who do not know, I am on both sides of the story. My sister was a donor and I a recipient. So typically the way that organs are available is from somebody who is brain dead. So they've experienced an injury that has left them neurologically impaired. Some have their brain is not working at all to support any bodily functions, and they're on life support to breathe and make sure that the heart is still beating. My sister's case was she was a brain dead donor. There's a new process called deceased donor, which is somebody is still breathing on their own and their brain is intact, or not breathing on their own, their brain is intact, but they're on life support. And the minute you disconnect life support, it is expected that they will pass. No meaningful recovery is possible for them. They cannot survive off of life support. And this is a little different than the way we used to do donations, which meant a lot of organs were not used because the manner of death was not optimal. So this new method is called a deceased donor heart. And these hearts become available when somebody They suspect that they will pass quickly as soon as life support is removed. So the family says goodbye. They're removed to the operating room. Life support is stopped. A natural death occurs, and then they immediately go in and procure the organs that they're going to use for transplant. And it's a lot. It's a lot to process, but it does make for a viable donor. And the downtime of the heart doesn't change much from somebody who was brain dead versus somebody who goes through deceased donor death. They're just different mechanisms of death that allow a donor to be a donor. So there's that little educational moment on heart transplantation brought to you by Lisa at the HCMA. So Lynda, you got the call. We had a conversation, and then I got to talk to your kids a little bit while you were in your recovery. Let's talk, nobody's recovery is great.
So I didn't get that heart.
Oh, you didn't get that heart.
I didn't get that heart.
Sorry, that's wrong. I forgot about that. Next.
So I was all set, and all of that did happen.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. I did talk to Lisa, and she did talk to my children, and I was in the operating room. All of that happened, but they pulled the plug about 2 hours in because it took her a little longer to pass, and the heart was compromised. So everything was called off. It was a trial run. It became just a dry run, and it was actually a good experience because I had a little better understanding of the process the next time. So we didn't know. We didn't know how long it was going to take. We were going to go back to the route again. I was scheduled for another series of desensitization. And so I was scheduled to go into the hospital. December 2nd, I went into the hospital. I got all set up. And the next morning on the 3rd, they were going to start my first plasmapheresis, the treatment to reduce the sensitization. But instead, I got a call from my coordinator on the morning about 5 a.m. of December 3rd. And they said that they had a perfect match, a match to my 97% sensitized heart. They expected the heart to be available later in the afternoon, and, time to get set. I made my phone calls. I called Lisa again. Alerted my children, and I was on the phone with the third of my 3 children while they were wheeling me to the operating room because I went into the operating room much sooner than I expected. So I actually went into the operating room with none of my family members there yet, but I had the phone. They took the phone out of my hands as I was rolled in. And so Lisa was my point of contact with my daughter, who finally got there and was alone for quite a few hours before one of my sons could join her. It was a very interesting procedure to be a single mom with adult children, but young adult children, because the part of you is scared to death of what's about to happen, but the other part of you is still being a mom and worrying about the traumatic effect it's having on your children and trying to, be there for them as well. So the recovery was interesting. It was about a 3-week recovery for me. We knew going in that my recovery would take a little longer than the average transplant patient, which is much less these days, recovery-wise. 10
you
days?
You were very deconditioned at the end.
I was.
You were rough at the end. Yeah.
And I also had 3, this was my 3rd open heart surgery. So they said this would also be a major factor in my recovery because each time you open the chest, it's harder to recover. So I was very weak. And so I spent about a week in ICU and then 2 weeks in the regular cardiac care unit. And so I got to come home on Christmas Eve.
That's
so I spent Christmas at home with my new heart.
That's a hell of a Christmas gift.
It was. It was right between my birthday and Christmas, so I consider it both.
It's both. Mine was a Valentine's present and a Groundhog's present, which is not quite as nice as a Christmas present. So I actually thought I was going to be in the hospital for Christmas. So in my go bag, I actually wrapped up presents to give away because if I was getting a present, they were getting a present. So I was listed in November, and then December came along, and bag was still packed, and I didn't unpack it. Mm-hmm. So when I started giving out Christmas gifts in February to the people who were coming into my room to care for me, they're like, "What is this?" I'm like, "I thought I'd be here for Christmas. I'm a little late. Here we go." So, yeah, transplant's weird. it's so intense to go through the physical process, but then much to the consideration of the discussion group that you run on emotional wellness, it's a big emotional journey. It's a big emotional journey. We all navigate it a little bit differently. There's no right way to do it. There's a lot of things that can help, but we all kind of have to get through the process in our own way. Oddly, I think it's a lot like grieving a death. There's no rule book. You do it how you do it, but you got to do it. You got to face it. Do you have any thoughts about the emotional journey of transplant that you'd want to share?
There's a few. It is very much as you, there's so much emotion going on. It's overwhelming at times, because not only are you thinking about your mortality and the fact that that your life survival depends on finding and accepting this heart. Both emotionally, mentally, and physically accepting it. It's a and you're starting to deal with these huge ideas while you're waiting for a heart. And the longer that wait goes, the more your mind, explores, well, what's going to happen if this happens, and what's going to happen. And then you see because you're surrounding yourself with people that are going through this process as well. And while that's helpful to have fellow patients to talk to and to understand, they understand best beyond anybody else could possibly about what you're feeling and doing, because they're feeling and doing it as well. So we kind of guide each other, through the processes of listing and waiting and then recovering and all of those things that go with it. Well, that's really helpful. That also gives you a lot of other different ideas, about, well, what if this happens, or what if that happens, or why was it so easy?
How come they got off lucky and they got this piece, but I got that thing? And
right, exactly. Yeah. So so you're kind of, you have to find a way to ground yourself, I would say, was the most important thing for me, and to accept that this is my reality. As much as I don't want it to be, and I wish there was another way, this is the way. And once I found a way to accept that and to just take it each day as it comes, I became much more peaceful in the process of waiting. And I think that my recovery was a little smoother emotionally for me, because I was already in a place where I was accepting of this journey that I had chosen for myself to survive.
So I remember your last transplant discussion group meeting. And girl, you were on the end. You were done. You were checked out. You were so sad that day.
It was.
And our hearts all were collectively breaking for you, because we wanted to get you to that finish line. You deserved it. You did your time, and you were next, and you didn't think it was going to be happening for you. And then it was within like days of that meeting that you got the call, because that was a December meeting, or it was maybe the November meeting before.
I think, it was after that, for that false call, right? Well, yes, and before the actual,
But it was really close, and
It
we were
was.
we were cheering you on. We were rallying behind you, because we wanted to see you get over that hump and get to the other side, as we call it, of the journey. There's the pre-transplant side, which is incredibly stressful. There's no, okay, so stupidest things people ask me before my transplant. Ready? Have you met your donor? I don't know. Maybe. Not really sure. I don't know. That was the one. And the other is, when is your surgery? We don't know when our surgery is going to be. So you're constantly, imagine you're having a major surgery and you don't know when it's going to be. They're just going to call you one day and you're going to go in and have major surgery. Okay. Like, that's not the way things work. Yeah, that's transplant. That's how it works. You wait till a magic call comes and you jump and you do. And that's the day you have surgery. No mental preparedness ahead of the day. Just, it's a big question mark, and then it's there. How did you process that unpredictability of life? Did you?
I think I was a little a bit of a nester during that period of time. I felt like I always needed to be arranging things and preparing for the unknown, so like for me that meant trying to like make sure that the tasks that needed that I might have left undone before, I was trying to get them done, and I was trying to I'm an attorney, and one of the big things that I did prior to my transplant was estate planning. So I was worrying that, I'm having a discussion with my daughter, like, well, this is where my will is, and this is this, and this is that. This is where you find this paperwork. I have everything in a folder for you, and this is who you need to call, because she was only 22 at the time, and and this is who's going to help you. And I always felt like that I just had to, I couldn't leave a stone unturned, but I'm doing this while I'm half alive, right? I didn't have the energy to be like cleaning the house, but and doing, some of the things that I might have done otherwise, like when you think of expectant mom nesting, and she's like deep cleaning the house. Well, I was beyond that. Those were the things I couldn't do anymore, but I could prepare paperwork, and I could make sure that my checking account was, it's just those. So those were the kinds of things I felt like I was doing, is just these little tasks to try to somehow be more prepared for when that call came.
I get it. I did a lot of the same. My tasks were not the homebody task, but in my case, it was fortifying this HCMA.
Yeah.
And I want to wrap up this edition by talking about the thing that we both did after our transplants, and not everybody does or can do, but we both went back to our old lives with new passion and with new vigor and got back to work. So can you talk to me about your back to work journey after transplant?
So I had a wonderful opportunity to go back to work, actually a little sooner than I thought that I would. So I had the transplant in December, and I went back to work the following June of 2022. So about 6 months later. And this was after having not worked at all for several years. So I started off as part-time. I worked about 25 hours a week. And I work for a nonprofit legal aid firm, and I do assistance with seniors on civil law issues like landlord-tenant, foreclosure, consumer issues, contracts, disputes, those types of things. So it was an excellent job. It was virtual. I could do it from home. I had flexibility, so that I could work around the many doctor appointments that we needed to still do in that first and second year after transplant. So now I've moved up. I'm in more of a full-time position. I've also taken on a leadership role in my firm. And so I do some.
I'm not surprised.
So I'm back into management again, and enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I love what I do. I'm giving back to my community, which is incredible. And it's meaningful work. And I enjoy, being part of a team again and being part of a workplace, very team effort, because everybody there is there for the same reason. I'm very passionate about the work that we do. So it was a great job to come back to. I really love it.
And I keep up with your travels on social media. Iceland?
Norway, Scandinavia last fall.
Norway, Scandinavia.
That was a solo trip. That was something I did on my own.
I love it. And I'm jealous because I got to get to Norway because I got family there. And where else have you been?
Just got back in March. I went. My daughter's a PhD student, so she teaches high school. So we work with her spring breaks and her summer vacations. We just got back from Chile and Argentina for her spring break. That was a wonderful little adventure. Yes. I love to travel. I can't get enough traveling. So I keep expanding my ability to travel, to go to more exciting places and that take a little bit more work. That's been a process too, Lisa, because, when you first start to recover, you're a little afraid to leave your where your hospital is and where your doctor is, and the medication management and making sure that you have everything and you know where you would need to get care if, so yeah. So that first year I stayed in the US, went to places where I knew people and where I'd have, and then as time has gone on, I've become more adventurous.
I love that. I love that. I still always wear my masks when I fly
I do as
because
well. Yes.
there's a lot of germs out there. And now we have measles to contend with, which a little public service announcement for everybody who goes, oh, it's no big deal. If a transplant patient were to get measles, the other thing that measles virus does is it kind of knocks out your underlying immunities and all the vaccines that you've had before. Not every one of them will be made inert, but most of them will. So there are reasons why immunocompromised people like transplant patients stay away from the unvaccinated people when there are things going around, whether it's flu, COVID, measles, or anything else that we can be vaccinated from. It's really important. If you are not vaccinated and you are friends with somebody with a transplant, you need to be cognizant of your ability to make them very sick and potentially give them something life-threatening. As we talk about, public policies in the future, it's people like Lynda and I who are at risk of having bad communicable diseases really destroy our lives. And after we've been through all the shit we've been through, people, we have fought to stay alive. Thank God for clinical trials and pharmaceuticals and all of the doctors and nurses that helped get us to where we are today. We're out there doing good work. We're out there fighting for those who don't have the voices or the platforms or the knowledge that we have in our given spaces. So we are among the transplant population that is back out there trying to make the world better for the next person coming behind us. So remember, that's why we're passionate about the things that we do, because we're trying to keep people alive. And here at the HCMA, we're trying to keep the big-hearted families whole. So Lynda, thank you so much for joining us on Tales from the Heart. I'm sure we'll have you back for another update on your adventures and see where you are the next time. If you're interested in joining Lynda in a discussion group, you can go to 4hcm.org and look up our calendar and find her discussion groups. Lynda, when do they typically run?
Usually the first Wednesday of the month. So I just had one this past Wednesday.
First Wednesdays of the month, you can meet with Lynda. We have other discussion group leaders on different topics. We hope you take advantage of those services. And thank you for joining us on Tales from the Heart, a podcast from the HCMA.
The Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association would like to thank our sponsors, Cytokinetics, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Edgewise Therapeutics.